Take Five. Thank you for joining me. It's a privilege to spend a few minutes with you just reflecting on life and seeing what Christ and the Scriptures might have to say to the various circumstances of our life. I'm doing something right now calling it the Great Swap, where my premise is that Christianity is the Great Swap. It's swapping my unrighteousness for Christ's righteousness, my hopelessness for Christ's hope. And it starts with receiving Christ by faith, who died on the cross for our sins and then rose again on the third day. When we do that, we have not only hope and forgiveness and power to live life well now, we have hope and perspective for eternity in our mortality, because we've swapped our mortality for his immortality. And it's nothing we do. We don't earn it. It's everything he's done, and we receive it by faith. I trust you've done that, or consider it, please. And then we swap our unrighteousness for his righteousness, our hopelessness for his hope. And there's a lot of implications and other swaps that go with it, and that's pretty much what we've been doing in our Take Fives with this. And here the great swap is this. I swap my weakness for his strength. Yeah, let's think about that for a minute. The context of where I will be is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And the Apostle Paul, in many ways, is approaching the subject of unanswered prayer. Have you had that? Where you've prayed again and again, maybe for a loved one's illness, or maybe for a loved one's spirituality, or you've prayed and you're in a situation without work or in a very tough place, and you pray, and there seems to be no answer whatsoever. And you think, Lord, what's going on here? Well, from the Apostle Paul's perspective, he was praying. He was praying for what he calls his thorn in the flesh, which some people think was a physical ailment, perhaps even his failing eyesight. Others think that it could be his opponents that are sort of thwarting him everywhere he goes to try to help churches and preach the gospel. He's got these enemies, and he's prayed to get rid of them, and they seem to always be there. And it's like, I prayed. It seems to be a worthwhile prayer with the right motives, and you don't seem to answer. Why not? And I'm going to read the answer here, but it's the idea the Lord was wanting him to realize that his grace, God's grace, was sufficient for Paul. That his weaknesses could be swapped for Christ's strength. And in that, he would be glorified. Let me just read it to you here. So I am reading 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. So that I would not exalt myself. Make me a big deal. A thorn in the flesh was given to me. This annoyance, whatever it would be, physical ailment, opponents. Thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me so that I would not exalt myself. Okay, so there's the setup, and here's what he says. Concerning this, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it would leave me. 3 times. He prayed, he pleaded. You've done that. You've prayed and you've pleaded for something, a person's healing, or for a situation to turn around, or you know what it is, and nothing's coming. And here's the Lord's answer. I pleaded with him 3 times that this thorn in the flesh would leave me. Verse 9, 2 Corinthians 12. But the Lord said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Trading my weakness for God's power. It's hard to say, but sometimes that's what God chooses to do. leaving us in our weak state, financially, physically, leaving us in that state so that he could be glorified and his power could shine through. A dear friend of mine passed away last week, 2 weeks ago. His name was Pete. As long as I've known Pete, Pete has been in a wheelchair. He was hit head on by a drunk driver many years ago. Pete was the first man I ever visited as a pastoral intern in the hospital. He was a paraplegic, almost a quadriplegic most of his life. We prayed all kinds of things for Pete, healing and strength. And here's what I want to tell you. In the weakness of that wheelchair, God's strength was demonstrated. His grace was sufficient for Pete. I would even say, Pete, don't you want to just be angry about the person that was drunk and hit you head on? And he would just chuckle at me and say, what good would that do? That's not a nice thing to do. God's grace was sufficient for Pete, and he was glorified in the weakness of his wheelchair. Sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers, but leaves us in a sense in our weakness so that we can swap our weakness for God's strength and others may know. Think about that. I'll see you next time on Take 5.